All right, everyone. Has everyone had their fill? Everyone's got enough coffee to get through the next few hours with us? All right, I hope you enjoyed lunch. We're glad that we could offer that. So welcome back. We'll go ahead and get started. Feel free to sneak back there and grab another brownie if you need to. This afternoon, we'll be having a series of conversations about not only specific examples, but the major aspects of two-generation work that you can be thinking about if you're building or enhancing your own efforts. Our first conversation will be about funding and design. And I'm pleased to reintroduce Ann Mosle, Executive Director of Ascend at the Aspen Institute and our partner in this work. Mindy Zapata from Southwest Human Development, both of whom you met this morning. Joining them, we have Kimberly Spring and Rico Alexander. Dr. Kimberly Spring is a Senior Research Associate at the Annie Casey Foundation, where she manages evaluation and research studies related to child development, family economic success, community change, and influence-related activities. She currently manages the multi-site, multi-year evaluation of one of the Foundation's major two-generation initiatives, known as the Family Economic Success Early Childhood Education Initiative. And when I mentioned that she would be joining us, the Ed Alliance folks who worked with her said, "Oh yes, she's great." So I give you that. Prior to joining the Casey Foundation, Kimberly worked as a research and policy analyst at the Corporation for National and Community Service, the federal agency that oversees the country's national service programs, as well as the Social Innovation Fund. And here in the center, we have Rico Alexander, who is the Early Head Start Director at Parents and Community Action, where we heard Gretchen speak from this morning. Rico oversees operations at PICA's 9 early childhood family development centers to provide comprehensive services and innovative programming to over 2,400 Head Start and Early Head Start children. He's been employed there for 22 years and has held a variety of positions within the agency during that time. He's participated as a leadership coach in the NHSA Nike Starting Block Leadership Program and is a graduate of the UCLA Johnson & Johnson Management Fellows Program. We'll begin from Ann on the end and hear from them individually, and then we'll be having a conversation across this group and with all of you about two-generation program models and funding. Ann?
All righty, everybody feeling good? Great conversation. We're nourished with good food. Thank you. And I just think that the presentations earlier are really fantastic, and were a wonderful setup for this conversation about design and funding. Okay, is it on now? Human error, lean in. So I just great conversations of the folks and the teams that shared their models from the two-generation approach. I think it was really a very wise way to set up the conversation around design and funding. I think it's really important that we think about design and funding as two distinct bodies of work and a mixture of art and science that are also very interrelated. So what I thought I would do to kind of kick off the conversation was first just kind of go a little bit into design. So we have some common framework and language, and then share about sort of 6 funding ideas I have for conversation. On the design piece, I think one of the things that we think is really important and kind of basic, as my 14-year-old daughter always says, duh, isn't that obvious? But the two-generation approach really is about child and parent outcomes. And we don't always, many Head Start people will start at a similar place, but what does it mean to really measure child and adult outcomes? We heard about data systems, we've heard about different strategies, but as you're thinking about whatever body of work you're doing or partnership you have, how do you make sure that, that you are really focusing on the key elements for the child and the adult, and then how do they come together? This is also lifted, this is part of the graphic that we shared with the National Human Services Association in the 2Gen report. But what are the key components to a two-generation initiative? And this is something, we have different language or different ways that we might undertake this work, but this is really meant to be, how can we have some common language to have some meta-analysis about what we're doing? And when you look at the 5 components here, I think it's important to realize these are the components that it takes any family to thrive, no matter where you sit on the economic ladder. When you look at the first part here, the early childhood component is probably the grounding one as we sit here in a Head Start-based conversation. What are the core components of early childhood? But then how does that really come together with post-secondary education? So a child and her mother, for example, can move forward together. Within post-secondary education, how are we making sure that is linked to workforce development? So say there is a partnership. We heard about some great work from Ed Alliance and others. And also, just in Mississippi, just the first two, how are we connecting to where there are real job opportunities, real employers, making sure those pathways are on a path that's going to lead towards economic security. Third, the economic supports and assets arena. That can be anything from looking at bundled services, financial education, being banked, the housing stability. Fourth, health and well-being. This is something that is very powerful and very important, and I think whether it's issues that we've seen from toxic stress, the overwhelming impact of mental health, how are we able to look at health and well-being and have that be, again, that's been from the beginning part of Head Start, how are we bringing these systems and strategies together? And then lastly, the social capital. And the social capital one, I think, is another important component that plays distinctly to the strengths and the values of Head Start. Social capital is very simply the formal and informal networks and relationships one has in their lives. So whether that's how the family advocate, the role of the family advocate, the policy councils, the partnerships in communities, there are many informal and formal social capital strategies that you all are employing in the work that you do. When you think about design and you think about components and you think about how this comes together, there are many questions, many issues, many different ways to look at it, but just 3 questions I want to put out there to sort of leave in the room and for discussion is first is always being, you can call it population segmentation. What that really means is know who you serve. There is such diversity of parents, whether it's race and ethnicity, whether it's structure, whether it's geography. For us, we've taken a lot of look at what are the differences when you look through race and ethnically and geography-wise. What about the single-parent household? What about mothers versus fathers? What about families that have experienced the criminal justice system? So I think it's really important to be very clear about who you're serving and what crosses over and what might not. Second question or second issue is really having the capacity to build, broker, or borrow as you set up relationships. When I think about the brilliant work down in Mississippi where you canvass the 50-mile radius of every employer, you are looking at a way in Mississippi to say, we're not going to create every job, but we can build the pathways to the job. So how are you thinking about whether there's, who are the partners you need to have the goals that you want? In order to get 2-generation outcomes, it's not upon a Head Start center to figure it out all on your own, but it is to have the right partnerships to get you there and to get the families there. And then lastly, is meeting families where they are. This is something, again, I think it's a core value for many in the Head Start community. Folks might be, some parents might be able to start it like, I really want to do financial education. I want to get my housing stable. Other folks might be ready for a full-fledged job, workforce preparation. I think it's very important that we think through what are the stages, and it's a continuum. So we're always meeting families where they are. A lot more details, a lot more good thinking about all of those kind of ideas that I'm sure you all have to share. Quickly on the funding, flipping to the funding side, I have sort of 6 ideas around funding that I'll put out for conversation. First, what if we had a cross-agency 2-generation initiative fund? Now, who would have interest in that being successful? Well, let me suggest just a few. One, I think the Department of Health and Human Services. This is, as if Mark Greenberg said last year, I think it was at the NHSA conference, especially the Administration for Children and Families thinks of itself as the original 2-gen agency. But HHS, Department of Labor, Department of Education, and Department of Housing Urban Development. I think all of us, if they even put 1% of their budget into a 2-generation initiative fund that could leverage some of those handholds, how phenomenal would that be? Second, The Department of Health and Human Services, and specifically the Administration for Children and Families, is truly a two-generation partner. When I think about just ACF, the Administration for Children and Families, which oversees Head Start, food assistance, TANF and employment, child support, that's a $58 billion lever right there. And a lot of shared values and a lot of shared interest. Last year in their strategic plan, they noted 3 things happening in the world, external factors, that they thought were very important that would fuel their work going forward. Those 3 trends were looking at adverse childhood experiences and looking at intergenerational trauma and how do we have trauma-informed care. 2, the issues around toxic stress and a better understanding of brain science research. And there's been a lot of good research about understanding what's going on in children's minds. We've been focusing a lot more on what's happening in adult minds, especially young adults. There's actually some interesting information that will be coming out in a little bit. And then 3rd was the two-generation approach. Again, starting with the early formation of Head Start that has always had a two-generation approach, those are 3 guiding external factors that are being discussed on the internal front. And so I just sort of share that about what might be some opportunities to talk to partners at the Department of Health and Human Services to think differently about how can we blend some funding streams with TANF, child support, food assistance, home visiting into the work that you're already doing. 3rd is how are we leveraging public-private funding? We sort of walked our talk on this a little bit 2 years ago, and we just made announcements last year, where at the Aspen Institute, we created the Ascend Fund, which was leveraged with support from foundations like the Gates Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, as well as new wealth individuals that were just beginning to think about their philanthropy, to put a call out for people who said, I want to bring a two-generation approach to my work. I might be thinking I might find myself a little bit, I might be more child-serving, but if I became more, brought the parent in, could that make it better? Or vice versa. I'm pleased to say we had about $1 million that we could put out in the first, and this was an innovation partnership fund. Everybody had to be willing to be part of a network. We received 254 applications from organizations across the country. Everything from national entities like the National Head Start Association, which we are thrilled to partner with, to some Head Starts out there in the field, community colleges, a whole range of partners, many of whom are in this room, to really kind of help walk the path with us on building that portfolio of solutions I mentioned earlier. The 254 proposals totaled up $12 million. We had about 1 million, so of course we overspent and put out 1.2 million in grants, but those were really meant to be partnerships and to really also create a model that other foundations could then follow, as well as potentially the federal government. So I think how we are always trying to think about leveraging resources and leveraging partnerships in the public-private world across silos is really important. I think there are many foundations that have also are probably working with you in your communities and nationally that have been very committed to this work. I want to give a shout out to the Annie Casey Foundation, which has been very committed to the two-generation approach, working with many of you in the room and also with Ascend, and also the Kellogg Foundation, which I think has put out lots of other great resources. And I would be remiss if I didn't just give a little shout out to the Foundation for Child Development, which a long time ago laid some groundwork from a research perspective. Many more, dangerous when you say any names, but I do think it's important to call out those 3 because they really have been flagship. 2 other last quick thoughts. The other one is, and many of you may be thinking about that, when we think about the field of impact investing, pay for success, social impact bonds. I don't know how many of you have been working on that, but that's a whole different mechanism that is really looking at, can you both make a mission return, i.e. a social return, can children and families be better, and also make a financial return. This is something that we've been also tracking, and there are a couple, 3 relevant pay-for-success or social impact bonds that have been out there. One in Utah that is specifically looking in pre-K, another in South Carolina that is looking at the nurse-family partnership, and a 3rd one building on the parent-child education partnership model. I share this because this is something that the Pay-for-Success is really looking at the opportunities around new and fresh capital to programs that are able to capture what are core outcomes, they're able to capture the results, they're able to demonstrate the savings that can be made, the benefit and the cost savings, And then also have a government agency anchor partner as well as a replication model. This is something, there is more capital than there are investments right now. It's not a turn the switch and it's easy to do, but I do think much of the work you're doing, there is some ripe potential. And then lastly, so I've talked about sort of new funding ideas. The last one I want to end on is actually something that the Ed Alliance team said, was that they were doing all this amazing work, working all these incredible people, and the funding that they had for their 2-gen work was only 2% of their budget. So for this, I share that in that part of this is, it's not all about what's all the new funding, it's also leveraging the work that you're already doing, as well as some of those partners. So I'm going to end with that. There's just a couple, 6 quick ideas, but happy to talk later.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I have a little bit of a cold, and I'm going to try to keep my germs to myself. But you'll have to excuse me if I have to, if you find me coughing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the funder's perspective. So I was going to talk a little bit about the work that the Casey Foundation is doing around the this two-generation work. And really, I would characterize 4 primary objectives that the foundation has in terms of the work that we're doing. First is to provide support directly to organizations like Education Alliance, which we're really happy to be partnering with. So organizations that are already investing in 2-generation work and finding ways that we can help them strengthen their program. The second, which is probably what I'm most closely associated with, is the research and evaluation side, which is to be able to document when and how 2-generation approaches actually lead to better outcomes for children and their families. The third is to then think about how we can take all this that we're learning and disseminate it to the field, both to help those who want to promote a 2-generation approach as well as those who are looking to implement or strengthen their own approaches. And then the fourth is really thinking about how to inform a policy agenda. And I think this goes back to Anne's comment about thinking about how to draw in funding, how to braid funding more effectively so that it actually facilitates the use of a 2-generation approach. And I would, for those of you who are not aware, the Casey Foundation a couple of months ago just put out a report that offers some policy recommendations, which you might want. It's available on our website if you're interested. So, of course, at the Casey Foundation, we don't have enough resources to fully fund a 2-generation approach, and so we really try to use our funding very strategically. We provide technical assistance. We use a lot of our funding to support learning networks. We're very interested in peer-to-peer learning, understanding that we don't know everything and that all of you who are on the ground doing the work actually know a lot more than we do, so how can we help bring all of you together to learn from one another? And then, of course, this idea of trying to build the evidence for a 2-generation approach so that it becomes a convincing argument to make to policymakers and other funders. At the Casey Foundation, we're not interested in looking for a single model. The idea is not to say this is what 2-generation approach looks like. We understand that a 2-generation approach is going to depend upon the context in which you're working, the families that you're working with, what are their needs and their goals, what are your own organizational strengths. But that we do at the same time understand we do define the 2-generation approach very specifically as incorporating 3 pillars. The first being early childhood education and childcare. And of course we work a lot, the programs that we work with are all Head Start and Early Head Start funded. The third pillar is around parent and family capacity. And then the third pillar is around family economic success and working primarily with parents to figure out what are their economic and career goals and what kind of services they need to help fulfill those goals. And I think that what we end up focusing on most with the work that we're doing is around how to successfully integrate those 3 pillars together. What does it take? Looking at things like how do you successfully integrate data systems together? How do you make sure that frontline staff who are working with children have access to data on the parents that help inform the decisions they're making around the children, and vice versa? How do you bring staff together so that they're actually partnering with one another and making decisions around the family? What kind of effective family assessment tools are there so that you're not doing a child assessment over here and a parent assessment over here, but you're thinking about the family as a whole? So we end up focusing a lot on trying to understand what is integration, what does it mean to have these services integrated together, And then the other is, I think, really trying to understand what becomes necessary around family economic success. That in a lot of ways, we know what helps children succeed. We've got the early childhood education and development down, but then what is it that we need to do to provide families with the supports they need so that they can succeed economically? Excuse me. Already mentioned that we have two major initiatives. We have multiple investments within the two-generation approach trying to fund the various components, but we have two major initiatives. The one is this Family Economic Success Early Childhood Education, which is working in 4 locations, Educational Alliance in New York, Garrett County Community Action Committee, which is in Garrett County, Maryland, Atlanta Partnership, which is in Atlanta, Georgia, and then CAP Tulsa. And then we have our other major initiative is the Family-Centered Community Change Initiative, which is a little different in that we intentionally went into neighborhoods that have existing community change efforts, so San Antonio, Buffalo, and Columbus. And so going into those that have promise neighborhoods or choice neighborhoods, Columbus, which just has its own kind of homegrown neighborhood community development initiative, and how to work within those community existing efforts to build in a two-generation framework for implementing their programs. So we're really interested in understanding these as learning opportunities. Like I said, building some evidence, and then obviously our broad-term goal is to bring this back to the field and really try to strengthen the work among the two-generation programs. So I'll stop there and I'll pass it on to Rico.
Good afternoon. Rico Alexander, Parents Community Action. I'm with the program that Gretchen presented on earlier. We provide the parent training projects, the 96-hour, 6-week parent training projects in areas of child development, transportation, clerical services, and food services, nutrition. And I just want to tell you, it feels good to be in this room because a lot of practitioners in here, we're doing a lot of the same work, and that's real inspiring because when you go back home to your community and you work with some neighboring programs and you see that parents are not always the most important within that program, so it feels good to be amongst programs that still value the importance of parent involvement and really what that means to propelling parents to get out of poverty and enhance our communities. But, I've once heard, well, it wasn't once, I heard this person say it over and over again, the best social service program is a job. And that's the truth because it does so much for your outlook, and your ability to be able to provide for your family, and it just works so much on your self-esteem. And so I like the saying, and I'm going to continue to spread that so you can use it if you want to. But really, that's what our projects are about. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to it, but the truth is, at the end of the day, what we're doing is training our parents. So that they can get jobs within our community where they can get hired, where there's a need. There's a need for a diverse workforce in our community and those different training projects that we put together. I mean, there's a need for drivers. More and more programs are providing transportation, not just in the K-12 system, but early childhood. They're going door to door like we are. So we are creating a workforce of drivers who are well trained. And they get them at no cost to them because they have been trained in our program. And same with our classrooms. I mean, you all have as a practitioner, I just want to tell you, you all have the ability to do this work without funding or very little funding. You can make this happen. I mean, the truth is, for us, our staff in our classrooms and our kitchens and on the road, I mean, they're our trainers. They're the ones who are modeling the behavior of what it means to have a job and to do good on the workplace. So these folks are the ones who it's a train-to-trainer model, and it doesn't take much money to really be able to do that. I mean, you may have a little cost in materials. When we first started this project years ago, we did have a little funding from foundations, the Dollar Store, if you have those, and Minnesota, we have a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and General Mills is a big sponsor of ours. However, grant money comes and goes, and it's kind of hard to depend on that, you know, if you're going to put together a project. And in our case, we have stipends for parents. At the end of at the end of their training, they receive, at the time, they received a $150 stipend. We have, you know, since increased that to $300, but that is simply to really offset the cost they may have had during the course of their training. You know, whether, as Gretchen had mentioned earlier, buy a coat, shoes, or what have you, maybe some babysitting. So these are costs that they have, but you can actually do that without. You can actually do this program without having any real major costs. You know, you may have some materials that you need to develop as well. However, we do understand that foundation money comes and goes, so we decided to embed this funding for the project into our budget, and we all have the ability to do that. You all have, if you're running Head Start programs, you all have parent activity money, you all have parent training money, and you have line item flexibility where you can move that money based on what your needs are. And so we thought it important to make sure that, you know, while we're training our parents on all kinds of different projects we have, you know, but this one right here was really important because we understand that if we can, as Gretchen mentioned earlier, plant our seeds in the community, Head Start will have a flavor. You know, they'll understand the importance of a diverse group of folks who are working in their organization, who have been well trained, who understand what it means to be able to work with people of different cultures. And so we're really excited, and we don't mind, you know, we do mind that the schools are taking our teachers, but at the same time, you know, those schools are starting to look more and more like Head Start, you know, and this is at a time where they're trying to serve more and more 4-year-olds. And that's the other thing about it. You know, our child development training project is probably our most popular, and that's very important because this is at a time when our classrooms are becoming more and more diverse in the K-12 system, and the teachers who are, you know, graduating from programs are not reflective both ethnically and racially of the children that they're serving. And so when we have, you know, Gretchen mentioned earlier that 96% of our teachers in Minnesota in the K-12 system are white. And so the fact that we can train teachers who look like the children and families that we're serving is actually a benefit. No, we don't want to lose our teachers, you know, but we do have a process by which when we train our parents, we have a pool of potential folks that can step right in, and they understand how PICA does it and how Head Start does it. And so, you know, that's our motto, and we're always looking to really make adjustments to it. Always looking to create new ones. Right now, we're really contemplating a janitorial project, because the truth is there's work for folks to clean buildings in our neighborhood, you know, and so that's next on the slab for us. And we also, and we have put together our 700-hour internship program, and we're looking to partner with our local organizations so that we can not just have our parents trained within our organization, but they can go out and train within our, you know, partners, and so they can see what it's like to be in a different setting than the setting that they have been in when they first were bringing their kid to the program.
So again, my name is Mindy Zapata, and I'm with Southwest Human Development in Phoenix, and I would like to echo everything that Rico just shared. It's not always easy going on the end of some very wise suggestions. I'd just like to maybe build on some of the information that Rico just presented, and I'd like to start with design. So as I shared previously, we're a relatively new endeavor and a formalized two-generation project in our early Head Start and Head Start program. But I think one of the most critical features that we would attribute to our success is really having had some key programmatic design features. Rico referred to some of the systemic fiscal aspects within our Head Start and early Head Start models that we have flexibility to. I think when times get hard in our Head Start community, sometimes we just go back to our most basic and intuitive activities that we've done for a very long time. And sometimes when there's challenges and adversity, what we should do is really look to have greater innovation. And I I think there's this, I know in our western part of the United States, sometimes there's a propensity to do what we've always done because that's what we've always done. And what I think the two-generation concepts that we started this discussion about design and funding really speak to is that we have to think more innovatively than we ever have before. Head Start tends to be everything to everyone, and we can no longer do that. And so seeking out some of those partners like Department of Labor, we don't have to do the community assessment analysis to see what the 50-mile radius is of the employers for the next 10 years, what that fabric will look like in our communities. We can ask people that have already funded those community analyses and then use them in a way to inform the very strategic initiatives under two-generation programming that we design in our local community. We live in a place that's very warm in Phoenix. A lot of people like to retire there. So in our community, in addition to our CDA credentialing program, one of the things that we have on the horizon, we have a lot of a very growing senior population. Working in the allied medical field is something that's going to be an employable opportunity for entry-level workforce on into more sophisticated employees as they acquire greater vocational and formal education. So really looking to, as Rico has in his community, he describes some of the food service, transportation work, those systems that in this two-generation concept require us to look internally to our internal systems that sustain across our funding inside, but also outside those design features in our larger community that support the availability. We don't want to create back at home, if you're considering doing a two-generation model, you don't want to create a vocational work training program that it will end up not being able to sustain this meaningful economic opportunity with which these two-generation projects are aimed. So those are what we are thinking in the concept of program design, internal, external, in the larger community. And really the takeaway I think that we've learned in Phoenix is think outside the box and look to those other entities in the larger community that are not those similar entities that we've always looked for those innovations, to think more strategically about what you take on. And then from the funding side of things, I think Rico said it very, very well, that these do not, we heard 2% of a total, kind of financial perspective of a grantee. These do not have to be huge dollars. We do a lot of this work already. In the CDA credentialing program, there's a lot of infrastructure, again, the design that supports the implementation of these intern 96 hours. We're doing the 480 because we're doing it over a course of a year. Versus a more concise get people into the workforce model, both really, really advantages to take. But really looking to those resources that you already have in your organizations and for those innovations that you can draw upon in more of a cost allocation model. And then as I shared earlier, looking out for some of those foundations, philanthropic entities that are willing to take on a similar effort to improve the economic opportunities of your local community.
All right, thank you so much. And one thing I want to call out while we're having the funding conversation is that if you look in your blue folders, you don't all have to do it right now, but one of the handouts that should be right in front of the purple evaluation form, which I'll tell you about later, is a two-page document that lays out all of the current funding opportunities and forecasts from Health and Human Services, as well as a few from the Department of Labor and the Department of, oh gosh, I'm going to forget what it is. There's another one in there. There's one that's cross-listed with DOJ that are related to two-generation work. So some of them are the Health Profession Opportunity Grants, which you'll hear mentioned this afternoon. There are some grant opportunities out there right now about supporting individual development accounts. And so encourage you to take a look at those as you think about where you might want to go, because all of you in this room are familiar with how to apply for HHS grants and what they take. And there may be some interesting ideas there if you explore what's available, as well as some for refugee communities, which turns me to one of my first questions for the panel, and then we'll get to some of yours, which is that coincidentally, both of your programs happen to be in large refugee resettlement areas. And so to all of you, all four of you, do you have any thoughts on what diverse communities can either bring to inform the design of your model, and how do you think about your particular community needs when you were designing yours?
Yeah, I guess I'll begin. Our model was actually designed prior to me getting there. I wasn't working there when our model was designed. However, we do have a very diverse community, and the good thing about our program, all communities are different, and so we have a locally designed approach to providing services to all of our children. Not one family comes in to our program needing the same thing. So we have what we would like to think of as a kind of a smorgasbord of opportunities for parents to have their child engaged in our program. We have a full day service for parents who are either working or going to school, okay? And it's full day, full year model. We have a program for parents who are in homeless shelters. And so we provide kind of a longer day, a more extended a day a week for those children. While, so when children are in the program receiving services, parents are going about the business of really trying to help themselves with the most basic needs, And we do have a double session model, and somebody referred to that model earlier. I think Wasi's program, where they have, a 3.5-hour day, 5 days a week in our case, for parents who need that kind of service. And then probably our most popular option is our split week model. And that model is a model where children are coming to school either 2 or 3 days out of the week for a 6-hour day. So in September, when your child comes in to the program, you're coming in on a Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for a 6-hour day. And we call that A session. Those children are A session. Then in B session, children are coming to school for Thursday and Friday. Sometime in January, that child that was in B session gains that Wednesday, and the child in A session loses that Wednesday, and so the B session children are coming to school 3 days a week. So really, at the end of the year, they're both getting the same numbers of days of service, but there's more hours. If you add up the hours that programs are getting, there's more hours of service, more classroom time. And that's important because in some of those other models, we have a lot of new immigrant families, and some are undocumented, and so they're working kind of these odd hours, and so the model, the part day model, really works for them because they have the opportunity to put their child into a program, a model that's a longer day, and they can avail themselves to the different training opportunities that we have. Not only the parent training projects, but the GED, the ESL, and the citizenship classes that we provide. And so they don't have to worry about putting their child into a 3.5-hour day, and then having to put your child in Minnesota. It snows a lot, as you probably know. And so when we pick a child up, and you got to go about the business of taking off the snow boots and all the jackets and all that kind of stuff. And you got to brush the teeth, and then all that. By the time you do all that, it's an hour and a half until you're losing a lot of classroom time, right? So that model really works. And so when they put their children in that model, they can really avail themselves, like I said, into the different things that are going to help them become successful, and help them reach their goal of being self-sufficient and getting out of poverty. I think that's, I don't know, hopefully that answers your question. I don't know.
Did you want to add anything else about your?
Sure. We don't have snow in Phoenix, and so we took a little bit different approach. We have worked very closely, and this was a new endeavor for us because we are seeing such ever-growing populations. Phoenix, as Emily said, is a high resettlement, refugee and resettlement location. It happens to be right in our service area. And there are a tremendous amount of very rapid, there are short-term for families, but associated services that can complement our two-generation program. So we have seen a significant enrollment and collaboration with Department of Economic Security Refugee and Resettlement program in our local area. So some of the associated transportation, language, vocational training that would normally come from our project is actually complemented by the Department of Economic Security. So it's been a really non-traditional collaboration for us, but one that lends itself to giving us culturally and linguistically relevant staff, which is really, really important when you have an influx of a new community member in a significant amount of the population, which has happened to us pretty quickly. So we've been very successful in making sure that we have maintained a linguistic match for our families and a cultural relevant match in a way that was not a traditional partnership that we had with refugee and resettlement services in Phoenix. So, great.
You know, actually, that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons why we've done it as well, you know, so that, you know, we can continue to have children who have people in the classroom that look and speak their language and understand who they are, because we understand that the #1 indicator for child success is their relationship with their teacher, and it begins early. And so when you have teachers in the classroom that really understand you and look like you from the beginning, that goes a long way. So, you know, thanks for kind of jarring my memory on that. Yeah.
Right, a lot of you have mentioned sort of the non-traditional partner, or the non-traditional funder. Who would you consider sort of beyond the typical public funding streams, and this is for all 4 of you, where would you encourage people to look, or who would you encourage them to reach out to that they might not have thought of before in sort of the day-to-day work of Head Start? Either of you want? Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think the first step I would sort of really encourage folks when they're thinking about going from building from Head Start to taking sort of 2Gen to the next level is to really have the conversation be about outcomes and impact that you're looking for. Not from the world that sometimes you probably feel you must live in, that is about regulation, rules, compliance. I think the real trick, and this has been sort of echoed throughout the morning and also on this panel, about what is the vision and the mission. There have been hundreds of compliance and regulations that have been created for very thoughtful reasons, but contort the conversation. And it's a very real thing. And so I think there's a pause button you hit first that is about what are we ultimately trying to be about. And so big picture, and then I'm going to go small picture. I think that I truly believe, being swinging at these fences for 20 plus years, like many of you, a little more, a little less, might feel longer, shorter, I don't know, shorter. But there is an opening now about really the issues around creating opportunity and equality for all. And I think there is a profound place of perspective and experience that you all come from. And so how do you think about being at the center of that conversation in your communities? And thinking wisely about it. So I don't discount for 1 second the challenge of being able to collect the data and evaluation. Questions about like what database are you using matter a lot. But there's different ways and different levels to think about how you're capturing your story. So then, this came up earlier in the panel, but there is nothing that gets the ball rolling like a little bit of success and sharing your story. And so starting the conversation about shared vision, shared mission, and then bringing people into you are where families are. You're at the heart of community. So a natural starting place in your world is certainly thinking about your community foundation, your women's foundation, some of the other local partners. I think the bank is another wonderful example. Who are those that have as much stake in this game as you do? So that came up when you look at just the report that Yasmin and her team put together. Those partnerships are highlighted. We've been seeing that at the national level. Our phone is ringing off the hook from different foundations saying, how can we work differently about this? Some foundations are looking across their funding streams. There's one foundation, they're literally putting out about $8 million in scholarships for parents, and then they have an early childhood program over there. They're not connected. So this point of connection I just share, foundations are generally looking for similar answers that you all might be working on through the day. And so really sort of being able to tell your story, have some of the shared outcomes, bringing others in that are asking the same question to be partners. I think the private sector, the banks, and the employers are really important to have at the table because that's an end goal. I do also think, Head Start is a federal, local conversation, but how you work in regions, how you work the association to really push for a new conversation with the Administration for Children and Families is a ripe opportunity. And maybe it's some capacity building dollars that can help spark this conversation as well as potentially access different sources of funding that may or may not be coming through the Pay for Success model movement. Kimberly?
So I don't want to duplicate a lot of what Anne's already said. I think she's given a lot of good examples of ways to go. I think one of the things, but maybe building a little bit off of what she was mentioning, which is to be really clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then also thinking about and thinking about partners maybe in a slightly different way, so that there's because there can be the tendency to think I need to be able to provide all these services myself, as opposed to understanding about how you can more than just a referral, so more than just saying, go to this community college or go to this agency. How can you build really strong partnerships with organizations that are serving the same families that you are? How can you go to them and say, these are the outcomes I'm trying to achieve, and work with them to understand how you can then create an integrated program where you work closely with one another. It's not a necessarily easy thing to do, but on long-term sustainability, it's really helpful. And then you don't have to worry about building your own internal capacity to provide services that maybe it's not within your mission or might be slightly outside. Thinking about this particularly around the family economic success work, which might not be necessarily where your forte is, but there are lots of organizations in your community that are working in that area. So how can you then partner with them and develop strong memorandums of understanding and data sharing agreements where you can partner together to provide those services for the families?
All right, I know Sylvia's got the mic back there. I'm sure that some of you have questions for our folks on the panel and their different perspectives. Yep, we've got two in the back and then one over here.
Hi, thank you for all your work, everybody. I have a question. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and we've been working with several people in a university setting and a county structure around a special program that's not Head Start, and we've gotten some outside funding for that from the county service levy and United Way funds, so that's been helpful. But I'm also very interested, our board is very interested in this, about how perception matters. I mean, we now have a huge early Head Start grant. We now are at about $32 million, I think. And so we feel like we have to be, somewhat cautious and careful as we go out saying we need more money, because we're among one of the well-funded programs in Ohio. So we are trying to piece together requests that have to do with extending beyond Head Start. So if we're looking at doing some follow-along studies and things like that. We're looking at doing some things with school districts that would follow kids farther. And that isn't necessarily the use of Head Start funds for that. So I didn't know if people have concepts or thoughts about that, or how we have to kind of be careful as we walk that line. Our board has identified several banks that do have fundraising arms and might be willing to help us, but we are trying to craft our message so that we're not looking like a very well-funded federal program saying we're poor.
Anyone?
I'm happy
I don't know.
I'm so happy to go.
I'll just, lend my 2 cents. I mean, and I totally understand that, Mary. But if you need more money to provide those services, whether they're a part of Head Start or not, I think you show how you plan to use that money and what, like she mentioned, your expected outcomes are going to be. The truth of the matter is you're not asking for yourself. You're asking for the poorest children in your community. And that's really what it boils down to. Like Dr. Hogan had said earlier, I mean, he called it begging. It is what it is. That's what our job is. That's what our job is. And as uncomfortable as it may be at times, we should never feel bad about saying we need more money, because we do. There's a lot of children not being served.
All right. You go.
Okay. The other thing I would add is that I think in Head Start, I think it's all in the marketing. I think if you're a $32 million agency that demonstrates organizational capacity and stewardship of philanthropic funding, and I think in the larger early Head Start community, getting coherent with those external parties about what we do, why we do it, and what we're wanting to do more of, then funding an enterprise is an easier discussion to have. But I think sometimes in our Head Start, early Head Start community, we use words like comprehensive services, and it gets lost in the translation to the larger business sector. So I think before we even go out, we have to know what we're all about inside, so that we can take that message outside and market our assets of capacity, that if we're running a $32 million program, there must be an organizational capacity to steward those resources in a responsible fashion. I'm sure.
One thing, great question. I think one piece that I'd really push on, it's not that you're poor or you're rich, it's what you're trying to accomplish. And so, I mean, I think I'm like, oh my gosh, if there's one message about people walking out of this room that you're powerful, you're on the front end of change, and you're giving people, an opportunity to be a part of changing lives. Breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty is not a $50,000 grant. Bummer. And so I just think it's really important to tell what you're trying to accomplish, and then having the results to show why you're doing more. Mindy's comment about the coherence with the community is probably your most important piece, to make sure your partners are absolutely aligned, saying this is why, this is the anchor institution or the catalytic role that you play. I think is incredibly important, that's a very real thing when you're in the room and when you're not in the room. But another piece that you raised that I think is important for Head Start and beyond is when you talked about we're not just working at the up to 5 age. Well, a lot of times in the funding world, or just maybe we're trying to make sense of the world, we're saying, oh, it's all about birth to 3. No, it's birth to 5. It's birth to 8. It's the continuum. And so, especially for you, where you sit in Head Start, I think fully owning between early Head Start and Head Start, that point of intervention you have, it's not on your backs completely to fix everything and it's never going to fade out, because it's an easy ride once you hit 6 or 9. But you're at a key time, and you're also, I'm sure these partnerships are building out to last. So I just really, both from a strategy standpoint, but also kind of big picture, I think it's great what you're doing.
Thanks. I think there was one more question back here, and then we'll jump to Avance before we close the panel.
Good afternoon. This has been really very interesting and resourceful. I'm from Akron, Ohio, and I'm a community action director there. Of course, our Head Start program is marking 50 years, and very proud of it, and it's a comprehensive approach along with the rest of the program. I just want to make the point, and I'm really glad to see my friend, colleague there on the panel. I just want to make the point that I know that, and I've been around for ever, I guess you could say, more than 30 years, working as a part of this process. In the beginning, just as a reminder, and there is a question here, with Head Start coming out of the war on poverty and really community action in 1965. Can you maybe make some comments about some of those other, I guess, interests that were represented that were kind of tore away from the whole process, that basically now we're really interested in trying to get them back? Things, for example, there have been some comments as a part of previous sessions about some things that, like Upward Bound does. Upward Bound is still around and exists in many programs, special services and the foster grandparent program, many aspects of what was a war on poverty are around. I'm just wondering, do you find that useful? Because even though we're talking about Head Start, the federal regulations and guidelines are such that those programs, including community action, the community services block grant, also have a responsibility to provide support and assist those families in other ways that Head Start can't with the categorical funding for Head Start.
Thanks. So how do you see those other sort of War on Poverty programs? Are they folks that you partner with? How do you leverage those other funding streams and not try to do it all on your own?
Okay. Community action in our community is vital to what we do as it relates to helping us achieve our mission to really promote community change, support our parents, and helping them become self-sufficient. And we don't provide weatherization and heat assistance, for our families. And we need it in Minnesota. So it's very important that, and they're one of our best partners, our Community Action Agency. And so it's very important that we have a good relationship with them and they understand the needs of our families. In fact, our advocates work very closely with their staff, and they actually set aside special days for us where only our families can go in and access those resources. So those things are very important. They've always been important from the beginning, and they stay important till today. We couldn't do any of these things without any of our partners. And I'm sure I'm speaking for all the practitioners out here in the field. The community action agencies for us are very important.
All right, we're actually just about out of time, so I'll ask if any of you have a few final words you'd like to share or a final insight you'd like to send folks home with. Anything?
Pressure. I think the one thing I would say is, there's so much rich conversation here, and so we sort of have laid out 6 principles to doing 2-generation work, and at the risk of just pulling one out for right now, I'd really sort of highlight really doing intentional implementation. And I don't discount for 1 second how busy all of your lives when you go back, how they are, and all of the other competing pressures. And how do you take the time to take the step back to think about what you can stop doing, what you can stop doing, and maybe frees you up a little bit more space to do something you'd like to try or do differently. And then think about the other kind of discretionary room and then where the need resources are. That'd be my one thought.
Okay, I would say, like I said, this model, and think about your model. It doesn't require, as we mentioned, as much money as you may think. I think really what it boils down to is you have to think like our parents think, be creative like our parents, be aggressive in accessing resources like our parents are, and be smart like our parents, and don't take no for an answer because they don't, right? And so I think, right, that's what we got to do. If our parents can, and we get paid to do this work, right? And so I would say just be creative, be innovative, and just know our parents are doing the same kind of thing.
So this, I think, ties in hopefully quite well with what Ann and Rico already said. I think that, as part of Head Start, families go through a family assessment, but this goes back to the question and comment regarding the war on poverty and thinking about other resources that families need because they have complex needs. And so there are family assessment tools that are being developed that are a little bit more comprehensive and start to look at some of these other aspects of family well-being and family stability, and to think about how to get a sense of where your families are, to figure out what are their needs and what are their goals, and then try to then strategize from there to figure out what services are necessary.
Well, probably the takeaway that I would recommend is kind of the topic of the last hour has been if you have a concrete design internally, it'll lead you in the direction to have coherence or a clear message when you go externally in the community to those traditional governmental war on poverty partners or the new philanthropic entities that you might choose to pursue. And then in the context of funding, I think in Head Start, if we can stop thinking about how we can't because of compliance and think about how we can within the context of compliance, the opportunities to have greater 2-generation opportunities will be sustained.
Great. All right. Well, join me in thanking all our panelists, and we will rejoin in about 10 minutes.